Today we're going to take apart the Moto X2. This is the second generation Moto X that came out in 2014. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the phone and then use your little tool to remove the SIM card. And you can use that same tool or any metal little stick to poke through a little slot in the back of that hole to pry away the back from the phone. I used it to create a little slot and then slid a razor down inside instead to give me a little bit more leverage. And once I had one corner up, I was able to pull it off and away from the back of the phone. You want to make sure to avoid those ribbon cables along that left side. If you damage any of those, you'll have problems later on. Here's the back of the phone. And be careful when you're taking off these little rubber protectors. The first one is on its way to Mars, and I still have not found it yet. The second one protects the battery connection. You don't need to take off these screws for this repair, but if you do, the bottom one has the little bracket for the volume and power buttons, and then the other ones just remove this little logo piece. Pretty straightforward. And then all of these screws are what hold the back plate onto the phone itself, so make sure you remove every single one of those, and then pop this connector off the motherboard. It's similar to a Lego piece, just lift it up and away, and then it will unsnap. And then take the little tape off the connector. You'll have to do this a couple times and set it on the piece of plastic right next to it so you don't lose it. Lift up the little lever and then slide out the ribbon cable from the connector itself. That little ribbon cable goes to the volume and power buttons. Then you can unsnap the battery cable from the motherboard, and a lot of times if your phone is acting up or power cycling or just won't turn on, disconnecting and reconnecting the battery will fix your phone, so you can always give that a shot, and you won't need to take your phone apart for that. You can see the little contact pads for the earpiece, and this part is really cool, I think. To remove the battery, you can just grab these little pull tabs and pull the adhesive straight from the back side of the phone. It pulls it out so that the battery releases from the back side of the phone a lot easier than it normally would have. You can just kind of poke it with your finger and the battery will pop out. And there's still a little bit of adhesive in there, but as you can see, the battery pretty much just falls into your hands once you pull that adhesive tabs out from the bottom of the phone. Here's the battery. I'll try to link replacement parts in the video description below. The lens also comes out fairly easily. Just lift up on that little tab. If you need to replace that, I'll try to find replacement parts in the video description below as well. Motorola replacement parts are usually harder to find than most phones, but I'll do my best. Removing the tape for the LCD ribbon connector. There's a little tab along the top of that connector that you can kind of use to leverage out of the connector itself. Then you can lift up this little locking flap and pull that cable out. And those are the two cables that are connected to the screen. I'm going to wiggle the motherboard away from the frame of the screen. And you're set. So here's the screen. It is the glass, the LCD, and the frame of the phone all kind of glued together into one piece. These ribbon cables are attached to that as well. It will make your repair 100 times easier if you buy the replacement piece that has all of those parts combined, the glass, LCD, and frame. If you don't buy them together, you will have to use a heat gun to separate the glue and mesh them all together later on. You might still need to move over the rubber piece and the metal frame, but that's still easier than using a heat gun to try to separate all of that stuff. Anyway, before we try to put it back together again, I'm going to show you some stuff on the motherboard. It's got little rubber protectors on the microphones, so if you ever have problems hearing people, or they have problems hearing you, I guess, you can take those off and clean them. And then here's the rear-facing camera. Has the same little latch connectors that you've been working on this whole time. Slip the connector up and then the camera will pop right out. Once again, I'll try to put all replacement parts and tools in the video description below. Also, if you found this interesting so far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It does help me out a lot. Helps me keep making videos like this in the future. Here's the front-facing camera. Pretty straightforward. Has the same Lego type connector that you've been dealing with on that side of the phone this whole time. You can see the little vibrator motors right next to that, and the proximity sensor and light sensor are on the back of the phone. Well, I guess the front of the phone, depending on which way you're looking at it. Putting the phone back together again, you want to grab the motherboard and slip it up into the top of the frame first, making sure to line up those ribbon cables. And then there's the little latch down at the bottom that kind of pins the motherboard into the frame as well. Reconnecting the ribbon cables, just push them in as far as you can and then latch that down, and then use the same tape that you took off to make sure that latch doesn't come up again. Same thing with that LCD connector, and make sure you put the tape over that camera as well. Pretty straightforward. Now to get the battery back in there, you can add extra double-sided tape. in there to help keep the battery secure. It was a little bit sticky still, so I just popped the battery in there and I'm not going to worry about the extra tape. Getting the buttons back in, they have little holes in the middle of the buttons, so when you take that little metal bracket and stick it on the top again, it'll stick through those buttons to help keep them in place. And that's why you don't really need to take that apart unless you're going to work on the buttons themselves. I would recommend just leaving that screw in if you ever need to replace the screen or the battery. To get the screen positioned back in, I started with the top and then just kind of pressed it gently into place around the back side. Remember, it's not going to close completely, but you want it to be pretty darn close. Otherwise, the screws aren't going to reach and pin it down the rest of the way. Getting those power button flex cables pressed down along with the battery, and then the volume and power pushed into that little circuit board right there and locked down. I'm testing it really quick before I put in those bajillion screws in the back just to make sure everything's connected right. And if you did take off the logo and the volume buttons, make sure those screws are back in as well. They're all the same size. I believe it's a T4. Make sure that little rubber connector's back, and if this one ever comes back from Mars, I'll be sure to find it and plop it back in place. Make sure that the logo is positioned correctly, because that'll keep the back from lining up with the edge of the phone if it's not directly centered. So you might need to adjust that a couple times if you took it off. The back of the phone actually went on a lot easier than I thought it would, and it actually looks like it was never taken apart, which I was worried about because of how it was adhered to the phone in the first place. But as you can see, there is almost no indication that the phone was taken apart. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Don't forget to like if this video helped you, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks a ton for watching. Hope to see you around.